Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights. Here are your hosts, Hector Kolonas and Mike LaRosa.
Happy Friday, everyone. It's another week, and that means another weekly recap episode of the This Week in Coworking podcast. My name is Mike LaRosa, and I'm joined by our fearless leader, Hector Kolonas. Hey, Hector, great seeing you. How are you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. I think I just came back from an airport. You're sitting in an airport. This is the airport episode that talks about nothing to do with airports. So I'm good to be here, man. I had a really hectic week hanging out with a bunch of great people over in Boston. So many of the folks who read and listen to this, it's just been a great, re-energizing week from the newsletter side.
Yeah, a lot going on in the industry, not so much from a news standpoint, but I think more so from a networking standpoint. This week, sponsored for the newsletter as well as the podcast is iPostal One Workspace. And I think you were with them in person in Boston at GCUC. Looks like in the email this week is a recap of their roundtable. Anything you want to share, any takeaways from your participation in that?
Yeah, so they put on a pretty cool roundtable. And what I love about what they did with us is they then shared the notes that they shared at their roundtable and also the takeaways from everyone else who was at the two roundtables they did. And it made them available to everyone who reads the newsletter online. So if you're interested in kind of what they shared, their topic was all about how to incrementally grow more and more revenue from virtual mail, virtual offices, and the likes. So a really interesting thing we know is it's a pretty growing part of the revenue stack. And we're grateful to the iPostal One team for supporting us, for sharing this knowledge, and for just being great people.
Yeah. So always appreciative of the sponsors of both the newsletter and the podcast. It helps keep going on what we've got going on. And I know there's a lot more in the works that you're dying to share with everyone, Hector. But while we're on the topic of Juicy, do you just want to kind of share a little recap and takeaways? Always curious. There's always a few hot topics that are on the tip of everyone's tongue. What were people chatting about this year?
Absolutely. I did a bit of a polling of attendees who I got to hang out with, people who read the newsletter, people who I've known for a long time. We just met this morning, for example, some new readers. Great to have met you. What was interesting is there was a lot of optimism in a very interesting way. People were looking at what actually drives better revenue. People were looking at how can they optimize. People were looking at how they can train up their staff. People were looking at what kind of data they should be thinking about. AI had a bit of a session, which was great, pretty humorous session as well. But what the main underlying trend was that people were not just patting each other on the back about being in co-working. It was really about how do we all get through if things go well or if things get a little bit tougher or a lot tougher. And that was definitely the underlying thread. There was no panel about that. There was no talk about that. But that was definitely the buzz around is we're all in this together. What are you doing in this area? Are you seeing a downturn in this? How can we collaborate more? How can we share more? And that was the main buzz around. Obviously, there's big topics, the GSA news that came out a couple of weeks ago, changes in, I'm not going to drop the T word on this podcast. People were just not knowing what to expect and how to do that. A lot of nervousness, but also a lot of kind of quiet optimism.
Yep, I hear that even with the conversations that we had with our partners. I'm in Denver this week. It's, I would say, cautious optimism, knowing that there are uncertain market conditions, but that overall uncertainty is always generally positive for co-working and flexible workspaces because of the optionality and the flexibility that they inherently offer. I need to try to put a positive spin on that, but you got to try to find the silver linings in all of the craziness. So I'm glad to hear that you had a great opportunity to connect with readers and listeners. And it's always great to meet folks in person, put faces to names. And I know there's a bunch of other conferences coming up this year that you and or I will be at. So
Exactly.
always look forward to connecting
I did get
IRL.
I did get a few kind of banked high fives that I was meant to pass on to you. So the next time we're in real life, you're going to get a few of those regards from a whole bunch of people at the conference as well.
That's great. Yeah, it's never fun to miss a conference. You have major FOMO, but schedules are schedules. And I've got that calendar invite and a request to book a ticket. I was like, oh crap, that's the exact same week. I know we've got a couple stories to tackle. First and foremost, I know you've always led the charge as it relates to what we do publish, what we don't publish. We pride ourselves in always sharing what we know to be actually true, not just rumored or suspicions. And I'll tell you guys and gals, we got real bad, and we got to own that. Hector and I tried our best. We tried vetting multiple sources, looked at multiple links, looked up company names, and would you believe it? The story from last week, that co-working bus out of Switzerland, that was indeed April Fool's. It was a very good April Fool. I don't know how we let that happen. It might have also been just the sheer number of stories last week. And
That is true.
I know you're in the middle of a move. I'm juggling some travel. It's always the chaotic goings on, but just wanted to share everyone that no, there is not actually a really cool double-decker bus for co-working. But on that note, we do have a story this week that is verified and true, and there's a co-working boat now in Amsterdam. We've talked about there's been co-working boats, there's been co-working trains, there's been co-working boxes that have been popped up by Industrious and LL Bean in the middle of like parks. So the idea is not actually that far-fetched. And I don't know if you heard back from them in their response, but could this actually be something that does actually happen? Were they saying that it's something that got such a good positive response that maybe
Yeah.
it's something that they tried to do?
Yeah, so we found out we got because one of our awesome readers told their management team about it, and the management team's like, "That's great. Let's look into how we could do that too." And so they reached out to West Hive, and it was Courtney. Shout out to Courtney, and they got the response back that yes, sorry, it wasn't April Fool's, but we've had such a good response to this that we're now thinking about it. And as Yutashi and I jumped into this conversation last week, and I don't think it was the bus that we were discussing, right? We were discussing the concept of a bus. And in the post that I shared earlier this week when I found out, it was interesting to see the comments that folks had, like folks like Jerome over at Blank Spaces. I've been playing with this idea for years. Maybe we got, but we also foreshadowed about something that might be coming down the road near your house or co-working space.
Yeah, I'll have to get on Jerome for that. I think I'm going to be checking out their new Venice location at the end of the month. So I'll have to poke them and ask them when we're going to see maybe more California oriented. Maybe it's on a bus, maybe it's on a bus, maybe it's a Volkswagen bus. So like a little bit more California oriented. But yeah, so that was a fun little anecdote to kick it off. News-ish though, what's the main headline this week that caught your eye?
That is a great question. Yeah, so that didn't really catch my eye, but one of the stories that caught me was that I swapped seats. Instead of being a host or a co-host with you, Mike, I sat in the guest seat this week. I joined Bernie Mitchell on his podcast and dug into something that surprisingly many folks don't know that I do. My day job over at Syncaroo, what we do, but also digging really into the fact that co-working spaces don't realize that there's good revenue and terrible revenue. And so we dug into that and gave examples. And it was fun to be on the other side of the podcast to just answer the questions. So that was a lot of fun. We also had a bunch of other great podcasts in the newsletter. If you head to thisweekincoworking.com and click week 15, you'll be able to get the links to all these podcast episodes. But you'll also be able to see the episode that I did with Tim from Rivers over in Germany. We dig into their merger, what led up to it, what makes Germany's co-working market so different. So definitely go listen to that, especially since this week's going to be a pretty short episode. So we're saving you more time to go listen to other great podcasts in the co-working world.
Yeah, one of the podcasts that jumped out at me, there's another co-working podcast in the mix, the Two Marketers in a Co-working Podcast. I really enjoyed listening to this conversation, talking about different KPIs that matter for co-working spaces. And it touched upon one of the projects I've been working on for my day job in understanding the evolution of how KPIs are changing. Assumption of space changes as well. And we're seeing a lot of trends that Taylor and Kevin at this podcast, they had really great kind of baseline metrics I think are important to understand, but we're also seeing more changes trending more like hotel KPIs, right? Booking windows, booking volume, booking pace, a little bit less backward looking and a little bit more forward looking as to where are we on track for not only the pre-sale or sale of private offices, but also the bookings of meeting rooms and venues. So it's a lot of great conversations out there and a lot of great folks talking. It's always great to see more podcasts in the industry because it validates what we're doing, right?
I just realized as you were saying that we've become pretty meta in the fact that we're a podcast summarizing other podcasts, but definitely great to see other folks, especially folks who are friends of the newsletter. Both Taylor and Kevin have been long-time subscribers. I love what they're putting together. We're always looking at ways that we can support them on that journey, but definitely go and have a listen. It's always good to make sure that you're thinking about your KPIs. They are always shifting. And one of the things you mentioned is actually pretty cool is that it's going from retroact, looking at the past to looking at snapshots of right now that impact business tomorrow. And that is a great episode to go listen to. I'm not going to do them disservice by trying to summarize it any further than that. So go and have a listen by the link in the newsletter.
Yeah. And then I think it's time to tackle some market moves. As always, I think it's one of our busiest categories of news. Not a week goes by that we don't hear about new spaces opening. So friend of the podcast and the newsletter, Sophia from Piloto 151, announced that they're opening another location, this time in Dorado, Puerto Rico. Another brand that we've had on the podcast before, Space Made, our founder referenced, I think, talked about, alluded to this type of project, and their newest location has opened in London, but it's strictly focused on health tech and life sciences. So this is an example of yet more of that trend of industry specific workspaces. The Root is the brand that jumped on my radar when I first met Ben at where was it, GWA last year.
Yeah.
They've got a new location in Omaha. So I think that might also be their first location in the state. And maybe they have other locations in Nebraska, but I know they're Oklahoma based. And then last but not least, we've got a cool premium workspace operator named Quirk in France. And this kind of follows a trend. We're seeing more and more of these like big historic buildings that are being repositioned using Flex. And so this building that they're moving into is in a very haute couture neighborhood in Paris, one of their upscale districts. And they're in a building from 1875 that's got like this really cool levitating dome. I'm trying to see a video of it. We haven't gotten our hands on that yet. But yeah, it looks pretty nifty. And it's fun to see Flex Workspace breathe some life into these historic buildings. So that's what we've got for market moves this week.
Yeah, all pretty good moves. We touch on 4 different countries in the span of one newsletter. Great to see those moves being made. I also want to find a video of this levitating dome. If you have it, send it to us. I'd love to see it and reshare it. But just great to see some continued growth across the co-working industry, both at the niche side, at the general co-working side, what Sophia is doing with Piloto, but also Lux co-working. It's an entirely new growing part of co-working. And a lot of the conversations I had with some of the largest networks of co-working spaces this week and my kind of coffee breakouts, a lot of folks are exploring how do you really nail this kind of multi-brand, multi-tier structure so that you can provide more seats, but not water down your brand in maybe a building that doesn't fit your A-class or your top class Lux brand. So I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more kind of operators bringing out tertiary, either economy or accessible brands, or go the other way and go like ultra premium. We know last week we had 25N in the newsletter. We're launching that new kind of more luxury membership club offering. I think we're going to just keep seeing that. It's definitely an undercurrent that I'm now starting to track as well.
Anything else in the newsletter that jumped out at you? I know there was a lot going on with events, so I know there wasn't a ton of news. It was nice to have a little bit of a breather, but any last stories that you've got before we wrap things up for folks?
I think this is one kind of tech piece that jumped out to me. I know that we've been seeing over the last couple of years, aggregator platforms going from competing with brokers for leads to them being shifted towards the broker being the user of the aggregator, predominantly in the UK market and across Europe. It started happening a whole lot in the US with kind of more and more platforms being designed for brokers, not the end user. But we had Ricardo, who's pretty predominant in the LATAM prop tech industry, sharing that they're starting to see the same evolution happening across that region as well. So just a trend to keep watching, that more and more of these aggregators are trying to find network effects as opposed to trying to sell directly to B2B2C. I think that's a trend we're going to keep seeing with Managed and Valve and all these platforms gunning for the broker tool of choice. So I think it's just something to keep an eye on, making sure that if that's who you sell through, you're going to have to think about that as part of your aggregation strategy as well.
Yes, I could spend many hours talking about the pros and cons of leveraging broker networks as channels for selling aggregators. It makes sense. And you get that network effect. But as with anything, what benefits also come with, I wouldn't say challenges, but right in navigating different company structures, organization, internal politics, and just understanding the overall landscape. So that's another week with week 15 in the can. Hopefully, I know you don't have as much of a relaxing weekend coming up, but I hope our listeners do. And I think next week we'll be seeing Hector in his new podcast studio.
Absolutely. That's the plan. All I got to do is get everything set up by then. But if not, in the meantime, folks, if you have gotten news to share, we've missed your story, if we missed your celebration, if we missed your launch, if we missed that awesome blog post that you poured love and heart into, head over to This Week in Coworking, hit tools, click share links. That goes directly into our curation engine. It comes up because you are a subscriber. It comes straight to the top of the list for us. And it just allows us to make sure that we're telling your story as well. This is a newsletter for you, by you. We just happen to be the ones that hold the space. So thank you for listening again today. Thank you for dealing with this raspy voice of mine after 5 days of speaking about coworking. And we cannot wait to see you next week.